So let's be honest, the race wasn't an absolute thriller this time around, but there was one big moment for the race lead. Let's have a look at that. And it was in the pits. Norris and Verstappen pitting the same lap. And as they come out, it's side by side. And this is where McLaren have now a slight advantage because they won the Constructors' Championship last year, something that Red Bull had for the previous years. And it means that there could be either at the front of the pits or the end of the pit lane, and it's their choice as well. So in Suzuka, they were at the end, and it means that Lando gets a really nice launch from his pit box, and he can just filter into the fast lane at his leisure without having to dodge round a pit crew, as Verstappen had to do in the Red Bull. So from 1.4 seconds back coming into the pits, they leave side by side. And it's partly thanks to the positioning, but it's mostly thanks to a pit stop difference between the McLaren crew and the Red Bull crew. And there's a bit in driving for good measure. In all of it, they come out side by side. But it's really difficult now for Lando to merge in. And you can see here, as they're positioned, he's actually only got half his car on the pit exit line. The rest is on this apron on the outside, and certainly the right-hand wheels are. And that's just going to run out into the grass. And that's exactly what happens as we play it through. He's just forced wide, off he goes, and heading towards that barrier on the outside. And now this is actually remarkably close. When you look at it, he's sideways, and there's not a lot of margin there to the barrier for Lando. But clearly, no room at the end, and that keeps Max into the race lead. Now, Lando wasn't very happy about this and called into the race stewards to have a look, which they did. But as we look again, there is obviously space here for two cars, but Max doesn't have to be super kind to Lando at the end. Lando's filtering in from the apron. His road is about to run out. Max definitely doesn't make it easy for him, but he doesn't have to steer his car down this line to make way for the guy on the right-hand side. It's up to Lando to filter in, and he doesn't have the space. But understandably, keeps his foot in, and it's a bit of a desperate attempt because he now knows the strategy is bust for McLaren, and it's now on to him to make the difference from the cockpit. On board for the two perspectives, Max obviously had his wits about him coming through the pits as well, knowing exactly where Lando was and when he released the pit lane speed limiter as well. It's a slow stop for Red Bull, unusual for that crew, and Max then goes to change his launch map on the pit exit. So he's looking down, changing his launch map so he's into race mode rather than race start mode for that launch off the pit lane. But what it means is he's possibly, with a look in his mirror as well, slightly late to release that pit lane speed limit button. And that gives Lando the chance to really launch up the inside and make the moment as hairy as it was in the end for Red Bull. Here's the look at the right rear, not going on. Second stab, the mechanic has a go to try and make sure the wheel's on as Max launches the car, and it's pretty hairy all round on that right rear. And it's in the nick of time, not only because they were released side by side, the two cars, but also 1/10, 2/10 slower on this, and it would be an unsafe release because as we see Max coming out, there is a Ferrari coming in for Charles Leclerc. So if he had to hold any longer for that stop, then he's going to have to be held even longer than that to not have an unsafe release and launch off into the path of Leclerc coming in. So it's just about safe there from Red Bull. And an uncharacteristic slow stop from them cost him 1 second in the pits compared to Norris. Finally, Norris's view, and this is a driver that is knowing this is his big chance. From 1.4 seconds back, it's a long shot to think that McLaren might possibly beat one of the best pit crews in the game. But let's have a look at Lando coming into his box because he knows that he's had to give it the beans at this point. And he actually has a little lock-up as he's turning there. The front left is locked. He's on the limit of brakes and deceleration. Credit to the McLaren crew because they don't flinch. And this is quite difficult when you're in there. You're all lined up on your marks, ready to do what could be a race-winning pit stop. And you suddenly see a puff of smoke from the left front and the driver locked up. You think he could be heading straight into the crew on the right-hand side. But they don't flinch. They're ready for him. And it's perfectly measured in the end from Lando. Manages to get the car in. It's a great launch. Off he goes. And then as we're coming out now, side by side, these are the practice start boxes on the right-hand side here from earlier on when the drivers were heading round to the grid. And there's a bit of rubber down on there as well. So it's not completely damp and slippery offline. So when Lando's now coming down, first of all, he releases the pit lane speed limit. You can see the dash go there. And it's clearly pretty much bang on the line or even just fraction after. And now he releases the limiter gets on the throttle, and there is a good amount of grip on that sort of apron there on the right-hand side. There's just no space for him to use it. And then he said it in the cool-down room afterwards, that barrier was suddenly coming up pretty close, and it was nearly quite a silly way to have an accident. Close moment, but not quite there for Norris. How did they manage to find the 1.4 seconds in the pits to be that close in the first place? That was the surprise, because really, when McLaren pitted Norris the same lap as Red Bull pitted Verstappen, it looked like strategically it would be all over. Firstly, the pit lane speed limit release. Now, Max radioed in and said he thinks that Lando dropped it early, but we've just seen on board that didn't look to be the case, and the data shows that it wasn't. The speed builds up for Lando there, and actually Max is just a little bit sloppy to release his pit lane speed limiter, and that added the pressure, and probably because of the switch change on the wheel and the check of his mirror, just missed it by 1/10 of a second. So you've got Lando storming up the inside. So that's the first part of it. But we can have a look on the way in as well, because there's a good approach to the pits for Norris. Knows that he has to give it everything. And as we look here, the speed he's taking through the right-hander coming into the pits is actually significantly higher than Max as well. So Max, a little bit more cautious coming into the pits. Lando giving it everything. We know he had the lock-up on the way down to the marks as well. It's a really well-executed pit in from the driver, stop on the marks from the driver, pit stop from the crew. It's perfectly executed. Where Red Bull, Max was a little bit more cautious coming in. Lando's even braking much harder than Max down to the line. He's taking some chance from behind the wheel here to just close that gap, to make it possibility that he can take the race lead. McLaren and Lando gave it everything, but it wasn't to be. And that was then pretty much the race done for Max. But should it have been? I think McLaren could have done something different here.
The closest Lando got was at pit exit. Can you give us your view of what happened there?
Yeah, I think the grass was it was not really well cut on the right-hand side. So I think, Lando saw that as well. And he made sure that it was nicely cut.